Between 1910 and 1930, the North saw its black population rise about 20%. Cities such as Chicago, Detroit, New York, and Cleveland saw some of the biggest increases. African Americans moved as individuals or small groups. The number one push factor was the racial climate in the South. Many African Americans wanted to avoid the racial segregation of Jim Crow's laws in the South and sought refuge in the supposed promised land of the North, where there was thought to be less segregation. In addition, there were better schools for African American children in the North.
So what did you do? Well, I became a post office clerk in 1927. I was only, say, 19 or 20 years old, and I became involved with the Communist Party, which is where I did my first writing with journalistic work.
But then you moved to New York.
Yeah, the party wasn't satisfied with my writing. It began to be more concerned with its political development, and I was instructed to write political pamphlets. So in other words, the party began to lack that free speech and expression that really attracted you in the first place. Absolutely. And it was in New York where you published your first novel, Uncle Tom's Children, right? Can you tell us a little about that book? Let's see. Uncle Tom's Children was a collection of short stories, and it was my revision of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, in which the black male protagonist is passive and sexless. And Stowe wanted slavery abolished, and she knew that an assertive, sexually active black man in the role of Uncle Tom could have alienated white readers and reinforced the threatening black stereotype. So I took my own story and I made one that displayed an assertive black manhood, where black men and women resisted oppression rather than engaging in passive suffering. Anything you want to add about maybe its thematic elements? From the beginning of my career to the end, racial violence was always a recurring theme. And the question I posed for readers was, why should someone be killed because he or she is black?
The reaction of Uncle Tom's Children was not as Wright expected. Readers responded with tears, which Wright did not want. He became determined not to repeat what he saw as his first book's sympathetic picture of suffering, and to write a book too hard and deep for tears. And that's when he wrote Native Son, which created a killer named Bigger Thomas, over whom no reader would cry.
Native Son revolves around Bigger Thomas, and Bigger is a 20-year-old black man who is a victim of white racism in Chicago during the 1930s. Now, what happens in Native Son, in a nutshell, is Bigger gets a job as a driver for a rich, well-known white family. And on his first job, Bigger drives the teenage daughter, Miss Mary Dalton. He drives her home, but she's so drunk that Bigger, he has to help her into the house. And eventually, he manages to get her up to her bedroom, but he becomes very frightened when the blind mother, Mrs. Dalton, approaches her room to see if Mary's home yet. And to keep Mary from mumbling and giving away his presence in her bedroom, since catching a black man alone in a white woman's room, that's the last thing he could have wanted. Well, to keep Mary quiet, he puts a pillow over her face and pushes down hard. And Mrs. Dalton, she reaches the bed and she smells the liquor and she leaves, just assuming Mary was too drunk and she passed out. And Bigger, he feels relieved. Like, thank God she didn't find me. But then he realizes that Mary's dead. And from then on, Bigger's situation goes downhill. He shoves the body into the basement furnace, cuts off her head just so her body would fit, and eventually her remains are discovered inside the furnace. And Bigger, he goes on the run. And the whole city's searching for Bigger Thomas. And while on the run, he kills his girlfriend Bessie by excuse me, by violently smashing her head in because he thought she would slow down his escape. And eventually he's caught and he's put on trial and he gets a death sentence. What did you try to tell your readers in Native Son? I wrote Native Son to show that the horrible violence that Bigger resorts to is just one of the effects of 350 years of slavery and oppression. And Bigger Thomas, he's a native son of the United States of America. Now, if only 10 or 20 Negroes had been put into slavery, we could call it injustice. But no, there were hundreds and thousands of them throughout the country. But if this state of affairs had lasted 2 or 3 years, we could say that it was unjust. But no, it lasted for more than 200 years. And injustice, which lasts for 3 long centuries and which exists among millions of people over thousands of square miles of territory, is injustice no longer. It is an accomplished fact of life. You see, what happens is that Bigger Thomas and all the whites that surround him, and they're all strangers. They don't know each other. They never met before. They know nothing, yet they hate. They hate because they fear, and they fear because they feel that the deepest feelings of their lives are being assaulted and outraged. And how does this happen? Shh. Let me tell you. Bigger, he has this attitude towards whites of powerful anger and great fear. He sees whiteness as this over-empowering force that's set against him for life. And to Bigger and his kind, white people, they're not really people. Instead, they're this great natural force, like a stormy sky looming overhead, or like a deep swirling river stretching suddenly at one's feet in the dark. They're all the same to him. All of them untrustworthy and frightening. And it is this hatred, this exact hatred, this overbearing, inferior sense of himself, that is what leads to violence. Faced with poverty, living in this one-room apartment with no food, while he sees all these happy white folks around him smiling, it makes him angry. And the media, the news, movies, it all poisons his brain, because that is what portrays blacks as animals, savage like brutes, and it really creates this negative stereotype. They refuse to see blacks as individuals. And Bigger, he's made to see whites as sophisticated, but he has to see himself as unworthy. And it only becomes inevitable that blacks, just like Bigger, will react with violence and hatred because they're pressured into a dangerous state of mind. Now, let me tell you what's so profound about this violent mindset. This violence only increases racism in American society, because blacks become exactly what the whites feared. They fit the exact negative stereotype of blackness, and what results is this vicious, endless circle, this cycle of racism. As whites continue seeing them as monsters, they're going to become monsters, they're going to support the stereotype, and whites, they'll keep on fearing no matter what they do. And this is where they make a mistake. Whites believe that only through oppression they can win. What Bigger represents is this tiny aspect of a problem whose reality sprawls across the nation. Whites scream, kill him, burn the life out of him, and still there will be murder again. How can law contradict the lives of millions of people and hope to be administered successfully? Do we believe in magic? Do you honestly believe that by burning a cross you can frighten a multitude and paralyze their will and impulses? Do you think that the white daughters in the homes of America will be any safer if you kill this nigger? No! I tell you in all solemnity that that they won't. The surest way to make certain that there will be more such murders is to kill this man. Kill him and swell the tide of pent-up lava that will someday break loose. Not in a single blundering accidental individual crime, but in a wild cataract of emotion that will brook no control. See, the emotions that broke loose in Bigger were already there, way before he murdered Miss Dalton. His crime was being black. Only until an understanding exists between blacks and whites will they be able to see each other as individuals and not merely as stereotypes. Whites fail to see blacks as human beings. If they did, there would be no Bigger Thomases.